Welcome to Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we're going to begin with the tale of the ages of man. The first men that gods created were the race of the men of gold. As long as Cronus, or Saturn, ruled the heavens, they lived free of care and untouched by toil or sorrow, almost like the gods themselves. Nor did they ever grow old. Their hands and feet retained their youth and strength. Lithe of limb, unvexed by ills, they rejoiced in feasting and gaiety, and the immortals loved them, and gave them plentiful harvests and stately herds. When their times came to die, they slipped into untroubled sleep. But while they lived, they had many desirable things. Earth yielded them her fruits of her own accord, and in great abundance. Rich in all they had need of, they lived out their days in calm and serenity. When destiny decreed that they pass from the earth, they became benevolent patron deities, who paced the length and breadth of the land, garmented in cloud, grant gifts, uphold justice, and avenge wrongs. Then the gods created a second race, the race of the men of silver. They were very different from the first, both in appearance and spirit. Their sons remained boys for a full 100 years, immature in their ways, tended and indulged by their mothers. And when such a child at last grew to young manhood, only a brief span of life was left him. Reckless actions plunged these new men into disaster, for they could not check their passions. They were savage and proud. They sinned against one another and no longer paid homage to the gods by bringing fitting sacrifices to their altars. Zeus was so displeased at this lack of reverence for the immortals that he removed this race from the earth. But even the silver race was not devoid of all virtues, that certain honors were not accorded them, for when they had ceased to live as human beings, they were permitted to roam the earth as demons. And now Father Zeus created a third race, the race of the men of bronze. These in turn were utterly unlike the silver, cruel and violent, concerned only with wars, and always eager to hurt one another. They disdained the fruits of the field, and fed on the flesh of animals. Their stubborn will was hard as diamonds. From their enormous shoulders grew massive arms, which none ventured to brave. They wore armor of bronze, dwelt in houses of bronze, and worked with brazen tools, for at time there was no iron. But though they were mighty of build and terrible and fought one another incessantly, they were powerless against death. And when they left the clear and radiant atmosphere of earth, they descended into the murky night of the underworld. When this race, too, had died out, Zeus, the son of Cronus, produced a fourth race to live on the nourishing earth. These new men were nobler and more just than those before them. They were the heroes of antiquity, called demigods. But in the end, they too fell into feuds and wars, some before the 7 gates of Thebes, where they were fighting for the realm of King Oedipus, others in the field of Troy, where they had come in ships for the sake of the beautiful Helen. When their existence on earth had ended in battle and disaster, Zeus assigned them a region at the very rim of the universe, on the islands of the blessed, gleaming in the dark sea. Here they led a tranquil and happy life after death, and 3 times a year the rich earth grants them a harvest of honey-sweet fruits. The old poet Hesiod, who tells the legends of the ages of man, ends with a sigh of regret. Ah! If only I did not belong to the 5th age of men, which is now come. Had I but died earlier, or come into the world later, for this is the Iron Age. These men are utterly corrupt. By day and by night they labor and fret, and the gods send them more and more gnawing cares. But they bring their greatest troubles upon themselves. The father does not love his son, nor the son loves his father. Guests hate host, and friends hate friend. Even brothers do not cherish each other with a whole heart, as in times gone by, and the gray hair of parents commands no reverence. The aged must listen to shameful language and suffer blows. Oh, ruthless men, have you forgotten the judgment the gods will pass, that you deny your old parents thanks for the cares they have had for you? Everywhere the right of might prevails, and city destroys its neighbor's city. Whoever is true to this oath and is good and just finds no favor, while the evildoer and the hard-hearted blasphemer are heaped with honors. Fairness and moderation are no longer esteemed. The wicked are allowed to harm the noble, to lie and to swear false oaths. And that is why these men are so unhappy. Discordant and malicious envies pursue them and cast gloom upon their brows. The goddess of virtue and all who until now had frequented the earth, sadly veil their lovely limbs in robes of white and flee from men. Back to the gathering of the eternal gods. Nothing but misery is left to mortals, and no end of this mournful state is yet in sight. Pyrrha and Decalion. In the age of the men of bronze, when Zeus, the ruler of the world, heard evil things about those who dwelt in it, he decided to walk the earth in mortal shape. But wherever he went, he found that rumor had fallen far short of the truth. One evening, as twilight deepened into night, he came to the halls of inhospitable Lycaon, King of Arcadia, who was known for his savagery. By miraculous signs and tokens, Zeus made evident his divine origin, and the people knelt and worshipped him. But Lycaon scoffed at their devout prayers. "Let us see," he said, "whether this guest of ours is a god or a mortal." And in his heart he resolved to destroy him at midnight, when his sleep would be the soundest. But first he killed a poor hostage, the people of Molosia, sent him cast part of the body, still warm, into boiling water, roasted part over the fire, and served this dish to the stranger for his evening meal. Zeus, who had seen through both what was done and what was intended, started up from the board and launched avenging flames upon the palace of the impious king. Shaken with terror, he fled into the open, but the very first sound of distress he uttered turned into a howl. His skin roughened to a shaggy pelt. His arms became legs. He had been changed into a blood-thirsty wolf. Then Zeus returned to Olympus, sat in council with the gods, and determined to wipe out the whole infamous race of man. He was just about to do this, but scouring all the earth with lightning, when he held back for fear that the sky might catch fire and burn the axis of the world. So he laid aside the thunderbolts the Cyclops had forged for him, and resolved to send torrents of rain down upon the earth and drown mortals in a vast flood. Instantly, the north wind and all the other winds that clear the skies were locked into the caves of Aeolus, and only the south wind was allowed to issue forth. Down to earth he flew with dripping wings, shrouded in darkness as black as pitch. Tides flowed from his white hair, fogs covered his forehead, and water oozed from his breast. He reached up to the sky, swept the clouds into his mighty grip, and began to squeeze them out. Thunder rumbled, and masses of rain beat down from the heavens. The violence of the storms bent the harvest and shattered the farmers' hopes. The long labors of the seasons had been in vain. Poseidon, the brother of Zeus, also helped in this orgy of destruction. He called together the rivers, saying, "Let loose your currents, engulf the houses, and wreck the dams." And they carried out his commands. while he himself struck the earth with his trident and shook the ground to make the way for the waters. The rivers rolled over the open meadows, deluged the fields, and tore down the saplings, temples, and homes. If a few palaces still loomed here and there, the great tide rose to their roofs in no time at all, and the tallest towers were caught up in a whirlpool. Soon no one could distinguish between water and land. Everything was sea, shoreless sea. Men tried to save themselves as best they could. One climbed a high mountain. Another took to his boat and rowed over the roof of his submerged house, or over his vineyard where the vine sprays bushed against the keel. Fish struggled in boughs of trees, while the fleeing stag and boar were at the mercy, spared, died of hunger on hills where nothing grew but bearing heather and ferns. In the land of Phocis there was still one mountain which lifted its peaks above the waste of water. It was Mount Parnassus. Decalion, whose father Prometheus had warned him of the coming flood and built him a boat, floated up to this mountain with Pyrrha, his wife. No man and no woman created ever surpassed these two in goodness and fear of the gods. When Zeus, looking down from the sky, saw only endless swamp where the earth had been, and only 2 people left of thousands upon thousands, both guiltless and devout worshippers of his deity, he sent the north wind to drive away the black clouds and scatter the fogs. Once more he showed heaven to earth and earth to heaven, while Poseidon, sovereign over the sea, laid down his trident and smoothed the waves. The sea had shores again. The rivers returned to their beds. The tops of the trees, smeared with mud, began to rise from the depths. Next came the hills, and at last the level plain spread clear and dry. Earth was restored. Decalion looked around. The land lay ravaged and silent as the tomb. At the sight, tears ran down his cheek, and he said to Pyrrha, "My only and beloved companion, in all directions as far as eye can reach, I see no living thing. We two are the only humans left on earth. All the rest have been drowned in the flood, and we, indeed, are not yet sure of our life. I tremble at every cloud, and even if all danger were past, what should 2 lonely people do on the abandoned earth? Oh, how I wish my father Prometheus had taught me the art of creating men and bringing spirit into shapes of clay." So he spoke, and in their solitude both he and his wife began to weep. Then they fell on their knees before a half-ruined altar of Themis and pleaded with the immortal goddess, "Tell us, goddess, how may we recreate the vanquished race of man? Oh, help the world to live again." "Go away from my altar," said a voice. "Veil your heads, loosen the garments from your limbs, and cast the bones of your mother behind you." Long they pondered over these mysterious words. Pyrrha, the first to break the silence, "Forgive me, great goddess," she said, "if I shudder and do not obey you, for I hesitate to offend my mother's shade by scattering abroad her bones." But Decalion's mind was suddenly illumined, as by a flash of light. He calmed his wife with soothing words. "Unless I am mistaken," he said, "the command of the gods never bids us to do wrong. The earth is our mother, and her bones are the stones. It is the stones, Pyrrha, that we have to cast behind us." Nonetheless, both were very doubtful about this explanation of the command of Themis. Yet, so they thought, there is no harm in trying. So they went to one side, veiled their heads, loosened the clasp of their garments as they had been told, and flung stones backward over their shoulders. And a miracle happened. The stones no longer remained hard and brittle. They became supple and grew and took on shape. Human forms stood out, not very distinctly at first, but rather like the first rough outline an artist hews from marble. Whatever was earthen and moist about the stones changed to flesh, and what was firm and hard was transformed to bones, while the veins turned into human veins. So in a very short time, with the help of the gods, the stones cast by the man became men, those by the woman became women. The human race does not deny its origin. It is a sturdy race, well fitted for a life of toil, and it never forgets the stuff from which it was made. Herein ends my tale for today, but I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends,